Hey family, this is David Mahan, Policy Director here at CCV. This is what's coming up on this episode of The Narrative.
I saw my father destroyed, my family torn asunder, and not just because our property was taken away, but individually. My father was a very patriotic Cuban. He didn't want to be an immigrant. He didn't want to flee. He wanted to stay and fight. And so we stayed. Well, all his friends went to what they called the North. And eventually he ended up being without any friends because they had all left. Everybody he went to university with and studied law school with him. There was one lawyer who had studied in my mother's year. My mother was also a lawyer, and that was Fidel Castro, who went to law school with my mom. Yeah. My mom knew him. He was one lawyer that stayed behind along with my parents. So unfortunately. So it really ends up in the state subjugates the individual. That really is all you need to know about it. And economically, it's a disaster because it takes away the market's price discovery mechanism. And so what you end up with is shortages. It never produces a single loaf of bread. It only produces bread lines.
Always honest, often blunt, and never afraid. This is The Narrative. I'm Center for Christian Virtue President Aaron Baer, and here with my co-host and our policy director at CCV, David Mahan. Excited for you to hear our conversation that we've got today. We just spoke with Mike Gonzalez. He's going to be on after our segment one here, and Mike is he's a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He is his family left Cuba when he was 12 years old, and now he really has zeroed in on foreign policy, especially communism. He actually just wrote a book about BLM. It is just a phenomenal conversation.
Outstanding.
Yeah, seriously, especially for those of you that have been wondering what's been going on in Cuba and how it connects to sort of the modern conversation around communism and Marxism in America, not just Ohio, obviously. It just was really good. So excited for you to hear that. But before we get to Mike's interview, just a few stories to cover, David. The first one was, I was going off on this on Twitter the other day. It was a pay-per-view performance for people to pay big money to watch a man beat a woman. Literally a man beat a woman. It was in an MMA fight, and so the man's not in prison. But because he said he was a woman, because he said his name was Alana McLaughlin, he was allowed to beat this woman senseless and choke her out, and he won his MMA fight earlier this week. And this guy, you see some of the pictures going around of this guy before he quote unquote transitioned.
Special forces.
Yeah, 6 years in the Army Special Forces, toured in Afghanistan. He had a PTSD diagnosis with a history of sexual abuse, poverty, and depression. I mean, like literally, it's any other context, this would be abuse. This would be assault. This would be, men shouldn't hit women. But for some reason, if he just dyes his hair pink and calls himself a lady, he's allowed to get away with this.
Absolutely. I have to believe that okay, so we got taken off guard in America, right? Like, kids are struggling, folks are suicidal, struggling with the skin that they're in, we're getting taken off guard. But now we're to the point where we're actually doing procedures on children and we're letting grown men beat women. I gotta believe, Aaron, that we're gonna stop giving folks a pass. Whether you call them, gender dysphoric, whether you call them trans, are most Americans willing to call that special forces male a woman? Is that where most Americans are? Because we've got grown men allowed to beat women. We got grown men allowed to be women. Grown men allowed to invade the privacy of women. Grown men allowed to verbally erase women. Basically virtually just erase women. How long are we going to stand for this? It's interesting also. How long are we going to allow this movement to experiment on children? There was an interesting story just kind of tagged onto this in of all places, Sweden, where 5 of the 6 gender clinics in Sweden, because of a lack of research and based on what some of the doctors are saying from the procedures that are being done, we need to pump the brakes on this. And so 5 of the 6 clinics have shut down until they can come up with some more definitive research as to does this type of procedure reduce the mental duress that these children are going through.
Well, and honestly, David, that's the thing that is most startling about this is because when you go look at the pictures of this man, like the fact that no one's like that people aren't seeing this and say we need to pump the brakes. I mean, that's the part about all of this that honestly scares me the most is we're going full speed down this path, and what you're seeing happen in Sweden where people are actually willing to pump the brakes. Right. We're not seeing that here. We're seeing, you go all in, and if you even take your foot off the gas, my wife was telling me, and I can't remember her name. There was a liberal writer, somebody who was on the forefront of the sort of the gay marriage movement, who made a comment about how, and she's one that will use someone's preferred pronouns, if you will. She's one that thinks if people want to transition, they should be able to. I believe she would even think that kids should be able to transition, which again is crazy, but okay. But her whole thing was like, well, but we have to not acknowledge though that, a man that wants to become a woman is not a woman. They're a trans woman. Right. So they're a different category. They're not.
It's not possible to transition.
It's not possible to actually. You've now become a different thing altogether, which again I think is biologically nonsensical and all of that. But at least it's a reality marker of saying, hey, you still have a physical domination advantage over women, right, just because you removed your penis. Like it doesn't just because you took your penis off and your testicles off. Right. And again, I know this is a Christian podcast, but let's talk bluntly about what's happening here and be honest.
What are we talking about?
Yeah. Like it's not like they and I feel like a lot of this stuff gets by. It's almost like what we've seen on the life movement where, when we start having ultrasounds, and even some of the folks like our friends at Created Equal that will put the pictures out there of this is what abortion really is, like, and I know that's jarring for a lot of folks, but that's one of the reasons abortion's been allowed to proliferate so much is because it's undercover and people don't see the mutilation of the child. Same thing that's happening here. We're uncomfortable talking about double mastectomies on prepubescent kids, or on pubescent kids, and turning kids into eunuchs or turning adults into eunuchs by removing their genitalia,
sterilizing,
like, but that doesn't change their advantage. And again, this is why in Ohio we're doing the Save Women Sports bill. We're seeing this all over the place.
SB 132 coming up in the Senate.
It's not. This issue is not going to go away, and especially for lawmakers who are just kind of hoping this is icky and they don't like talking about it and all that kind of stuff. And what's the big deal? Just go look at the pictures of this man beating this woman and tell me it's not a big deal.
That's right.
So next story here, and this is one, Dave, you've been all over this on the Ohio side. But there was just this is huge, especially for those of us who've been talking about the backpack bill and school choice. According to the U.S. Department of Education, since the beginning of the pandemic, more than 1.5 million students have left the public schools. And the number of students enrolled in public schools decreased by 3% from last school year, from 2019 to 2020 to 2020 to 2021. And those numbers continue to go up. Dave, I mean, you've been talking about stats here in Ohio. What does this mean to you, and what does this mean about as an opportunity for the church, or what should we be thinking through right now?
1.5 million students nationally, 58,000 students left the public system here in the state of Ohio. Backpack.com. They're looking for other alternatives. I love this. We've been stuck in this whack-a-mole thing where we're upset that Pharaoh's not raising our kids right. And this is finally the indicator saying that parents are doing their own thing. I don't know where I'm going to send my kids. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm taking control once again of our children's future. Backpack.com.
Backpackbill.com. I don't know what backpack.com is going to take you. You go buy a backpack. You go to backpackbill.com. You can actually help us pass this bill. But right. but what I think what's important there, Dave, is we talk a lot about, culture and the impact of culture, and there's always there's a really interesting question of how is culture formed, and I think for the most part we don't even fully realize or understand how culture is actually formed. I think things like technology do way more to impact culture than any individual organization. Our iPhones have done more to impact culture than anything else, and we don't even realize it. Travel has done more to impact culture than we don't even realize. Facebook and Instagram and Twitter have done more to impact culture than we even realize. And it's those subtle things, those subtle institutions, those subtle things that we take for granted that really form culture. And I think a phenomenal example of this is the public education system, where and I'm not even saying this was necessarily a nefarious thing or a bad thing, but I think it's one of the negative consequences of the way we've done education, which is the government established a system that said if you live in this area, then you are assigned to this school district, and this is where your kid goes. Which, again, I think a good and just and prosperous society like us should have a good public education system that's going to tell you, this is every kid is going to be able to access a quality education. Now, the problem with how we've done education in America is we have implicitly created a culture where parents can check out of their child's education.
Yeah, and leave it to the hands of humanists.
Exactly.
Leave it to the history of the public education system.
Yeah. But that's the just the flat basic reality of it is it's, hey, you live here. This is the school near you. Just send your kid here, and you don't, just rinse and repeat with all the other kids you have come through, and you don't need to think about it.
Right.
And that's one of the, I feel like, the silver linings of this terrible pandemic amongst everything, is I feel like for the first time, and obviously it's very clear, 1.5 million kids in America, you have families kind of lifting their heads up and saying, wait, is there something else here for us? Is there something, maybe there's a better way of doing this. Maybe there's someplace else that's going to be better for my kids. And that's one of those things, like, I feel like, the combination of the pandemic and this crazy LGBT stuff showing up in the schools, and even some of the CRT stuff, this is our moment. Yeah. Like, church, now is the time.
That's right. And a lot of times people try to make this a battle between public school and private school. Our homeschoolers went from 2.5 million in this country to 3.7 million.
Yeah.
Right. These are parents that are like, look, I didn't wake up this year wanting to homeschool my kids. I just don't have another option. I'm not doing this anymore. I think that's an exciting story.
Yeah. Now, third story, which ties into the one we just talked about. And again, this is the case for school choice, for things like the backpack bill, for why, again, I think for the church today, we have a lot of cultural issues we're dealing with, a lot of important things. We want to talk about what's going to be the most impactful for generations to come, helping children prosper, helping families thrive. It is school choice. I will die on that hill. And I think this is just one more story that shows that this is Hudson, Ohio is a suburb of Cleveland. It made kind of national news, especially all over the internet. The Hudson mayor, this guy Craig Schubert, is asking all 5 school board members in Hudson, Ohio, to resign or face possible criminal charges over a high school course, and the high school course was we have this thing called College Credit Plus in Ohio. Lots of states have this, where high school students can earn college credit for their eventual college education. And parents these kids were given this book, this resource called 642 Things to Write About, and it had all of these writing prompts in this book, and like one of the prompts was parents said there was a prompt that said to write a sex scene you wouldn't show your mom, and then said to rewrite that sex scene that they just wrote in a way that they would show their mom. This was the writing prompt that high school students in Ohio were given from the school, and this was promoting obscenity and pornography to these kids. And what jumped out to me about this one, Dave, in particular, and it reminded me of the situation we had in a Columbus suburb not too long ago in Hilliard, where the assistant principal sent an email to the teachers telling them to read a script to make the kids send letters to the city council to pass a sexual orientation gender identity bill, basically make all the kids into lobbyists. What jumped out to me when I heard about this story, same thing with Hilliard, is that how comfortable these school administrators felt giving this book out.
That's right.
That there was no sense, and it was the same thing in Hilliard. Like the principal wrote this email like it was like, oh hey, and by the way, next Friday is a dress down day, or don't forget that when you're parking your cars, that you got to follow these lanes. And it was such a casual, such a normal thing for them to be doing, and that's where again I'm so big on why school choice is the issue we need, because the waters that these school administrators and so many people, and again, not all of them, but the culture that is predominantly in that I will say is in every public school district, maybe not in every individual in that school district, but is 100% in every public school district, is so ideologically opposed to parental rights, a biblical understanding of the human person, that the only way it's going to get better is when kids get out and schools start feeling the financial pinch.
And parents are back in charge.
Right.
There's no reason until they have a voice, and with money, going to follow their own child. They have no choice in the matter. One of the things that really stood out to me in this was there was one parent that was at the school board meeting. I watched it. He said, "What else are you doing that we don't know of?" And that's the key. We like to focus in on just, okay, so one of the things here was describe a time where you wanted to have an orgasm but couldn't, right? And we get off on how obscene that is. But, in my mind, because of 20 years of experience of being in the classrooms 3, 4, 5 days a week all over, I'm thinking you have no idea what is going on that you've not heard. Right. That you've not heard. And I think with those of you who are being stirred by this, and I'm so encouraged to see these parents, if there is a document called 15 Harmful Elements, which basically breaks down some of the obscenity that's being pushed in these schools through different resources. If you'd like that resource, get on the website, ccv.org, sign up for our newsletters and things. We'll make sure that we get you a copy of that document. And then also the analysis tool that they put out for that. But this is a way that, before you get all stirred up and run into a school board meeting and cussing and fussing, it allows you to take the resources that you're seeing. Because again, these aren't curriculum. We didn't hear a story about a curriculum. We're listening to a story about a book, a supplemental material that was being put out there. And then you can put all of that into this analysis tool and then take that to the school board meeting and share it with other parents in your community.
Yeah, no, and that's, what's important about this right now, again, and we can't say this enough, because this is the first place people go whenever we start talking about the public schools, is they'll say, well, you got to be fair to these public schools. Especially, I know a teacher, they're not an ideologue, they're not trying to indoctrinate kids, or blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And I don't mean to be dismissive of it. That's right. We nobody here, nobody that's advocating for school choice thinks that every single person in the public schools is a terrible person and all that kind of stuff. What we're recognizing is the system is so flawed from the ground up, so lacking of accountability from the ground up, that even the good ones in there can't stop what's happening.
Right.
And this, when it's this level of harm, this level of crazy curriculum that's coming, just as you said, David, this is what we caught. What else is happening? And we just have seen enough of this that we know it's everywhere.
Yep. I keep hearing from legislators as we talk about this, and did a lot of district meetings and things over the summer. Dave, that's just in the big city. Well, Dave, in this case, that's just in the suburbs, but these little rural towns act like culture is emanating straight from the cornfield. No, culture, the same Twitter that you're watching and your kids are watching in the rural communities, the same Twitter that they're on in the suburbs and in the inner cities. Culture is worldwide now. And to say that culture is not impacting your little area, therefore your school is going to be somehow different than everybody else is just naive.
It's naive. And again, it's what we're ultimately doing. It's honestly, it reminds me of the transgender issue is because we're afraid to engage, because we're afraid to be offensive. And again, I don't think our goal first and foremost should ever be to be offensive. But because we're afraid of the pushback, we're allowing children to be hurt.
That's right.
And that's what this comes. Why is CCV? Why am I so fired up about? Why is Dave? Honestly, why did Dave leave what he was doing for the last 20 years and come here? It's because kids.
Why did I leave?
I know. So come on, easy now. But it's because kids are being hurt. That's why we do this. Kids are being hurt. Families are being torn apart. Lives are being destroyed. Kids, honestly, their souls are being damaged because they're being pushed an ideology that leads them away from Jesus.
And body of Christ, it's our fault. It's our fault. If we would just engage, if we would just step up, we could squash this stuff.
Yeah.
We could educate our own families. We could transform our communities. But we've abdicated our position and our authority, and we put this in the hands of Pharaoh and Caesar. And we've got to take control back.
That's right. Well, we're going to get you over to the conversation with Mike Gonzalez now. Again, I can't wait for you to hear this one. And I think it ties in too well about what we're seeing in the country and the ideology that's undergirding a lot of what Dave and I just talked about. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back here on The Narrative.
Center for Christian Virtue seeks the good of our neighbors by advocating for public policy that reflects the truth of the gospel. We empower people like you to have a voice in the culture on the most important political and cultural issues of the day. Through our public policy advocacy, grassroots activism, Church Ambassador Network, Ohio Christian Education Network, and Christian Business Partnership, there are countless ways for you to get involved. Join the movement today by visiting ccv.org or by clicking the link in the show notes. That's ccv.org and click Join the Network.
Stories are a way we relate to one another. It's hard to underestimate their importance. Wessler Media is here to help you preserve those stories that you hold dear. We'll produce a personal podcast, an audio scrapbook that will preserve those memories for generations to come. Get in touch today. Call toll-free or text 1-833-38-STORY, 1-833-38-STORY, or visit WesslerMedia.com. That's WESSLER media.com.
And welcome back to The Narrative. This is Aaron Baer, president of Center for Christian Virtue, here with my co-host, David Mahan. We're thrilled to have our guest on for today, Mike Gonzalez. He is with the Heritage Foundation to have our conversation around modern Marxism, especially as we're seeing it in Cuba and related to what's happening in America today. Mike is a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. He was a journalist for 2 decades with the Wall Street Journal and a former speechwriter in the Bush administration. He's an expert on socialism and identity politics and has been at the Heritage Foundation since 2009. Most recently, Mike is making news on the charts, on the Amazon bookselling charts with his book, BLM, The Making of a New Marxist Revolution. It is now the number 1 book in Black history. It's the number 2 book on Amazon as we're recording this in political philosophy. And I will say, too, for you Ohioans listening, especially for you Cincinnatians listening, he's going to be at Empower You in Cincinnati on October 5th, speaking with Dan Reginald's group. You can just go to Empower You online and see more information about where he's going to be. We're hoping to make that as well to see him. But Mike, thanks for joining us, man.
Aaron, David, thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, it's a pretty heady day. The book is selling super well. It's also number 1 in social policy. And so I'm a pretty humble guy. I know that in 3 months it's going to be again number 3, 3 million. For perspective, I go to some of my other books and I see how well they're selling.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Mike, I mean, we want to hear about your family fled Cuba when you were 12, and we want to talk about that a little bit. But I guess before we do that, just why? I mean, this book feels like it's dropping at the exact right time. we're always talking about this, but everyone's talking CRT right now, every critical race theory, everyone's talking Black Lives Matter, BLM, especially with school coming back. And your book seems to be hitting at just the right time. I think that's reflected on the charts. Why did you decide to take on this topic in particular?
I decided to take it up for several reasons, but the main one was that I saw things very clearly. I saw what was happening, and what was happening was that a group of Marxists who have been trained by other Marxists or former terrorists with the weather on the ground were manipulating the feelings of Americans. A horrible death took place. Those 9 minutes of the agony of George Floyd. Let's not forget this. You can't watch that and not be moved or repulsed by it. I was. So were members of my family, and the righteous indignation when people saw that have been manipulated to dismantle for the purpose of dismantling the foundations of American society. And I saw it clearly for what it was. And I said, well, I'm going to point this out because the media was not pointing it out. To point this out was to risk being punished by the New York Times or the Washington Post or all other members of the media, because they wanted to run with a narrative of social justice. And I don't think that's really the explanation for Black Lives Matter. So I decided to write a book about it. And I must say that it wasn't just the media, obviously present company excluded, that did this, that abdicated its responsibility. The political class, both parties, guys. People say, well, the Democrats buy into CRT and everything else, but and into Black Lives Matter. But the Republican parties, Republicans don't want to discuss Black Lives Matter for one thing. And let me just finish out with this, because the concept is unimpeachable. Black Lives Matter to me.
Yep.
I don't even say all lives matter because obviously all lives matter, right? We know that. In Christianity, all lives matter. But Blacks have suffered uniquely and exceptionally. And so we have to go out of our way. I'm okay with going out of our way and say, no, Black Lives Matter to me. And so I'm very comfortable with that. But we have to separate things between the concept, the movement, and I don't know what a movement is people demonstrating and putting signs on their lawns, and the organizations and their founders. My book is about the organizations and their founders, their links to communism, and their goals to dismantle the organizing principle of society. I'm quoting Alicia Garza. Sorry, long answer. Go ahead.
No, but that's
thank you.
Yeah, no, that's right. Well, and I think too, again, and we can circle back on this, but there's the whole, when you say, is it a movement or whatever, it in many ways too, it's a corporate movement, which is a whole other side of this equation. But what I want to kind of go back with you, Mike, a little bit and talk about, a lot of within Black Lives Matter and their Marxist principles. You see the rise of favorability of communism and Marxism in America generally, even within the church. And there seems to be a real disconnect between the Marxism that you hear BLM promoting, you even hear some Christians promoting, and the reality of Marxism and communism throughout the world, our experience with it, and even today. Again, your family had a unique experience fleeing Cuba. Could you just share a little bit about your experience there growing up, and what you see, what the Heritage Foundation sees still going on in Cuba today?
Well, I mean, I lived there at the height of revolutionary fervor between 1960, when I was born, in 1972, and it really was what happens in every communist society, right? The subjugation of the individual. I saw my father destroyed, my family torn asunder, and not just because our property was taken away, but individually. My father was a very patriotic Cuban. He didn't want to be an immigrant. He didn't want to flee. He wanted to stay and fight. And so we stayed. Well, all his friends went to what they called the North. And eventually he ended up being without any friends, because they had all left. Everybody he went to university with, and studied law school with him. There was one lawyer who had studied in my mother's year. My mother was also a lawyer, and that was Fidel Castro, who went to law school with my mom. Yeah. My mom knew him. He was one lawyer that stayed behind, along with my parents. So unfortunately, it really ends up in the state subjugates the individual. That really is all you need to know about it. And economically, it's a disaster because it takes away the market's price discovery mechanism, and so what you end up with is shortages. It never produces a single loaf of bread. It only produces bread lines.
Wow. So Mike, I'm just excited for you to dive in and kind of give a little bit of your perspective on, if there's any more of your story you want to share, but also just looking from, a young person's perspective of what's going on right now. It seems like, from my perspective, you've got this academia, wanting to debate what CRT is and, the roots of Black Lives Matter. And, you want to debate it academically. But I think for the average grassroots person, they're seeing it a different way. They don't care about all the definitions. They don't care about all the authors. And there's something that is provocative about the BLM movement that I feel like some of us on the right are missing in our messaging. And I don't know. What do you think?
So that's very interesting that you asked that, David, because I think that's putting it very well. And it sounds like you talk to young people. No, and I was talking to a young person recently.
And to be clear, David is not a young person himself.
I'm definitely a young person.
That's just
thank you for noticing.
He speaks to the young people.
Well, you two are in Columbus, Ohio, a city known for having young people.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, I was talking to a young person recently, and one of the things I say, one of the reasons I'm optimistic, is that Americans are uniquely and attached to liberty. Right. I think this will fail in the end because America is uniquely attached to liberty. But guess that also applies to the young who are buying into this. And this young person said to me, no, a lot of young people support Black Lives Matter because they are American and they like liberty. Communism is like these movies when the alien comes in and takes over the personality of the host, mimics the host, inhabits, looks outwardly like the host.
That's right.
And in this case, communists here sell justice, what Americans want. We like justice.
Right.
And they sell equality, even though they later they'll tell you what they want is equity, which is the opposite. And they sell liberation. It's one interesting thing. Always, they never use the word liberty. They always use the word liberation, because what they seek, they think society is divided between the oppressed and the oppressor, and they seek to liberate the oppressed from the oppressor. And so they call for liberation, but they know they're not selling liberty in the end.
That's right.
They know that. They know that what they're selling is central planning and collectivism. They're not at all interested in the liberty of the individual. So I think for that reason, it has sold fairly well. And that's another reason why I wrote the book that I wrote, to explain this is not going to lead anywhere good. This is not going to lead anywhere. It's already actually led to very bad outcomes. If you look at the spikes in homicides that have taken place in the last year in our major cities in violent crime, and you both know that African Americans make up over 50% of the victims of homicides and violent crime.
That's right.
So if you look at the study, and I'll finish it out here, there was a study done in the cities between 2014 and 2019 that were hit the worst by Black Lives Matter protests. And the estimate is that an extra between 3,000 and 9,000 people died as a result in homicides in these 5 years as a result of the police pulling back. And that's a lot of dead Americans and a lot of dead Black Americans.
Right. I think, to that point, I remember, when all of that was going on, and the right was talking about we're going to, they're trying to defund the police. I was hearing from the left, believers on the left, nobody's talking about defunding the police. Nobody is. And so now we're even here in Columbus seeing our governor out there trying to promote new recruits and things like that because we don't have enough. Was just in Youngstown, they're, hemorrhaging police officers, DC hemorrhaging police officers.
Right.
And the community in 8th Ward is crying out like, hey, we need some more cops out here. Right. But what is it going to take to get folks to see through the lie that these people act like they care about poor people, hurting people, but it's not that they care about you. It's that they hate somebody else and they're using you as human shields to get to that end.
That's very, very well put, David. And I think what you're seeing in Ward 8 and what you're seeing in Chicago and what you're seeing in many cities, I've traveled the country extensively in the last 3 months. I've been to 15 cities. I'm going to travel tomorrow very early. I'm going to hit another 15 cities in the next 3 months. My schedule is packed full. And you hear about crime, this explosion in crime everywhere. And I think that is coming home to roost. But by the way, Patrisse Cullors, one of the main founders and leaders of the Black Lives Matter organization, particularly Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, she cut a video very recently in which she said, no, it's not just about defunding the police. It's about getting rid of the prisons and getting rid of the court system. And right now, Black Lives Matter boasts on his BLMGNF, Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, boasts on his site, has videos celebrating how many jails they have stopped from being built. No society can exist without the police, without the prison system, and without the court system. We're not angels. Humans are flawed. Murders will continue to be committed. Theft will continue to be committed. Rape will continue to be committed. And racism will continue to exist because we're flawed. We have bad chips as humans. So we need very strong laws against crime, including racism. You cannot practice racism in the workplace. You cannot practice it in schools, something I wholeheartedly support, and we have very strong laws against this. They need to be enforced by the police with the threat of punitive measures like prisons and the court system. We cannot get rid of them.
So, Mike, what I have the hardest time wrapping my mind around, you look at guys like Bernie Sanders or AOC that sing the praises of Cuba's healthcare system, right, or sing the praises of the way Cuba's government operates. And you talk to people there, I'll never forget it. My wife and I, 2 years ago, was our 10th wedding anniversary. We went down to Tampa spent a few days down there, and we had an Uber driver who came over from Cuba, and his mother was a professor who was a university professor who was still in Cuba. And he, as an Uber driver, sent money home to her, right, the university professor, right, with all the degrees and, the good job. And he was sending money to her. And how does the left square this? And especially as it feels like 1984 memory hole type stuff as BLM is out there promoting a Marxist ideology of just redefining terms of what's actually happening with communism.
Because I think they really do think it's going to work here. There was an interview made this month with Patrisse Cullors. I don't mean to pick on her only because the other founders are equally bad. But she was saying, yes, I am a Marxist. There's been all this debate. I am a Marxist. And then she said, I don't use the term communism because I'm not sure about using the term communism because it gets a bad rap. And the interviewer said, it gets a bad rap because of its record of failure. She said, no, it gets a bad rap because of its record of failure. So she says that in the interview. So I think they do, how when Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, went on the floor of the Senate and said, we in America invented slavery forgot about the fact that Rome and Greece had slavery. The person,
right.
And I think we're so narcissistic that we want to take credit for everything.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
We invented slavery, and we're going to make communism work.
Yeah, that's good. That feels real grounded in reality.
I mean, it's like.
So let me ask you this real directly, because this is something that just came up it's actually came up in two of the debates I've done. I've had college professors say point blank that critical race theory is not Marxist.
Yeah, and that is a complete and utter rubbish. You can quote Richard Delgado, who when he was interviewed. So critical race theory was around starting in the 70s and 80s, but it really is in a convent outside of Madison, a convent where they finally hold a conference organized by Kimberly Crenshaw, and about 2 or 3 years later, Richard Delgado, one of the godfathers, probably up there in the top 5 of critical race theorists, he said, yeah, we were there, 24 of us, and we were looking at the stained glass windows and the crucifixes, and we thought, this is a pretty odd place for a bunch of Marxists. So he openly says it. Patricia Williams is very open about praising Marx in her essays. Derek Bell is very open. The godfather of critical race theory is very open about the fact that what he wants to do is revolutionize society, that he wants critical race theory, yes, it's an academic thing, but he wants it to jump the academy, as it has done because of BLM, and invade all of society and revolutionize society. In critical race theory, let's not forget, emerges out of critical legal theory, which is around in the 70s. In critical legal theory, is they themselves, Duncan Kennedy admits that he is influenced by Marcuse, Herbert Marcuse, and the new left that Marcuse is the guru of. And who's Herbert Marcuse? He's a critical theorist, critical legal theorist, critical race theory, critical theory. Critical theory starts in the 20s and 30s in Europe by Marxists. It's founded in the Institute for Social Research, is known as the Frankfurt School at the University of Frankfurt. We know it as the Frankfurt School. They used to call it Cafe Marx. And what they wanted to do was figure out why the working class was not rising everywhere, as Marx and Engels had promised, and they were not overthrowing the bourgeoisie, the owners of capital, and they realized that there were cultural reasons for that. That's why we call them cultural Marxists. But the whole thing is a Marxist idea, and it has a Marxist analysis of the world and of life. Obviously, it departs from economic determinism. It doesn't think that everything is because of the way man satisfies his material needs. They understand they actually do understand the cultural aspects of things, but they want to end up in the same place. And if you read Horkheimer, one of the main thought leaders of critical theory, he makes it very clear that he wants collectivism, central planning. So does Marcuse. And just one more thing, please, and then I'll let you go.
Keep going.
Marcuse, they all come to the U.S. Marcuse ends up being a teacher and the main ideological mentor of Angela Davis. He teaches her philosophy at Brandeis. Angela Davis is a communist. She's still around. She goes to universities and says, I'm a communist. I've always been a communist. Students stand up and clap because they don't know what it means. And she ran as vice president on the Communist Party ticket. So there'd be no, there can be no illusion about this. There can be no confusion. And Angela Davis just happens to be the main intellectual mentor of the founders of BLM. So you have quite a how Plato taught Socrates and Socrates taught Aristotle. Well, Marcuse, this is not. I'm not comparing these people to Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, but Marcuse teaches Angelo Davis, and Angelo Davis teaches the founders of BLM.
Yeah. It's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You get back to it. All gets back to Marcuse.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking devil's advocate here. You guys are just trying. You're the revisionist. You're trying to cover up all the amazing things that are happening in America with BLM, and you're just trying to conflate everything. I see where the patterns of trying to erase history. I see the patterns of trying to tear down systems and pillars, in line with Marxism, communism. But if we're, Cuba's a totalitarian state, and totalitarian states rely upon police states.
Right.
Why would we want to tear down, and defund the police if we were truly Marxist? Don't we need the police to become a police state and therefore lead the way to communism, to totalitarianism?
Aha. Because they want to destroy this police. They will have a police department all of their own.
Right.
After they come in, they have to rely on coercion. They have to rely on coercion. The communism relies on the vainglorious idea that you can change human nature.
Right.
Freedom and capitalism relies on the idea that, okay, let's recognize we're flawed. Let's recognize we act because of self-interest, and let's recognize that we can use that knowledge to our benefit. So Adam Smith's famous dictum: "It's not out of the benevolence of the baker, the butcher, that we get our bread, and the brewer that we get our beef, our bread, and our beer. It's because of their self-interest, right? Capitalism works because the brewer, the baker, and the butcher want to benefit themselves and their family.
Right.
They produce better beer, better bread, better beef, and sell it for profit.
Right.
That recognizes the fact that we're self-interested. Communism says man will stop being self-interested, and man is going to act in the interest of the collective. And they call that the new man. Che Guevara called it El Nuevo Hombre. But what happens, David? El Nuevo Hombre never shows up. So then you need coercion. Then you need the police state. Then you need to stop people from thinking. Then you need the gulags.
That's right. It's tragedy. It's tragedy and hope, right?
Right.
We create the issue by destabilizing society, and then everybody's going to cry out for us as the hope, even though we created the problem initially.
Right. I mean, Animal Farm. Don't forget Napoleon took away the puppies and raised them. And then when they were full-grown dogs, that was his new police force.
So Mike, I want to talk about, especially, as we see the seed scattering of BLM and Marxism all across the country, and it's trying to take root deeper and deeper. Again, we have these examples, and our closest being Cuba right now of communism at work. And I want to go back to this past summer when there were the uprisings in Cuba. And I remember I heard you do an interview with World Magazine, World Radio, and it was right in the middle of all these protests, and there was all this good coverage, especially in conservative media, of like, oh, there's finally the uprising happening in Cuba, and your interview was very sober.
Right.
You were wanting America to be encouraging the protests and encouraging what they were doing. But you didn't seem to have a rosy outlook at the time that this was going to overthrow the Cuban government and this was going to be the end of communism in Cuba. And from everything I can see today, you were right. Why was that your perspective? And how does that connect to the sort of Marxist government that's in Cuba today?
Because the Castro family, which is still running things in Cuba, and the Communist Party are not just going to listen to the people and negotiate a way out. That's never going to happen. Plus, I knew who was sitting in the White House. Joe Biden was not going to do anything to save the Cuba. he could have enhanced the internet. There were many proposals that were put to him about enhancing the ability of the 10 million Cubans using the internet and not having the government using anything from balloons to increase connectivity. And Joe Biden did nothing, because he's being advised by Juan Gonzalez in the National Security Council and the State Department that has another idea. They don't want the dissidents, the Cuban people, to get power. They want there to be a technocratic solution to Cuba. People like them, the smart people, the smart Cubans, the technocrats. Imagine who those technocrats are, the communists. So I knew that Joe Biden, we saw this sadly in just humiliatingly in Afghanistan, has always been wrong on every foreign policy decision he's taken. My first opinion piece in 1987, I still have it, was about Joe Biden. In the Dallas Morning News.
Yeah.
I can show you the picture. I look really young.
You still look young, Mike. Come on. Like you say, you still got some color in there. That's good.
So I did not think that the Cuban dissidents were going to succeed. No, alas, sadly.
Yeah. So then, when you're speaking to younger audiences today, and they're walking in open to the BLM message, or maybe supportive of the BLM message, where do you start with them, and where you hope? Yeah, again, I talk about this a lot when I do debates, especially when I did these 2 CRT debates. If I'm going in front of a liberal audience, my framework is typically, I'm not going to convince everybody in this room that all of a sudden I'm right and they're wrong. It's, can I open up their minds to think, well, maybe there's another perspective here. When you're engaging on this issue, where do you start? Where do you hope to get people to maybe get them to question what's happening in the country today?
Well, you have to know your audience, right? You have to be very humble first, especially when you're talking about young people. In a matter of weeks, I will have 3 teenage children, because my 12-year-old is going to become 13, and that will last for a few months until my oldest son turns 20. So when you have teenagers as children, you're used to criticism, you're used to skepticism from the parental authority. I'm very comfortable with this, and I think it's a healthy thing. I think you need to talk to them all the time to see what it is they want, what are their needs, what are their fears, and you try to explain to them according to who they are and what their fears and needs are, the way you see reality. You're not there to indoctrinate them. You say, I understand that you want social justice.
That's right.
I want social justice too. I've looked at the gap. I looked at the disparities. I looked at the racial disparities, and I think that we need to close those gaps. We need to find the right policy mix to do all we can to close the disparities. But what they're promising is not. It's first, they don't tell you they're promising liberty. They're promising liberation, and don't let them, because they play with words. They will say liberation for that reason, because they want to liberate the oppressed from the oppressor. But they don't tell you ever what we want is liberty at the end, because and a lot of people on the right also think that we went off on the wrong tangent with the Enlightenment, with individual self-interest and Adam Smith. They think that we forgot the common good. So what I say all the time, and I try to speak to young people in this way, I want individuals and their families to decide what is the common good for themselves. And we also have, as I said earlier in the interview, and I'll leave it there, that we have a lot of bad chips. We're flawed. We also have good chips.
That's right.
We also get, when we participate in charity, we get a special feeling, a good feeling. Christianity is based on that. And we don't know why. We don't know why we get that burst of good feeling when we help a kid, when we help an older person, when we help the vulnerable. and let's activate that chip.
I love this podcast. I need to connect with you offline. I feel like, as a communicator, I've been a speaker for 20 years, and in schools and different areas, I always look at my audience and break them up. 20% are going to believe everything I say, regardless of what I say. 20% are going to hate what I say, regardless of what I say. But you've got 60% that I'm really need to speak to. I feel like what I'm seeing politically right now, when it comes to race and BLM or CRT, whatever the issue du jour is that the left wants to talk to their 20%, the right wants to talk to their 20%, and you've got all these people, right, who we could be engaging, who we could literally be helping, who are being motivated not by, somebody's philosophy or crazy principle out of Marxism, but really out of a righteous desire to help somebody, because they see real suffering that most of those people on both sides of the 20% never see. And I feel like we keep missing opportunities to reach the 60.
Right. And the 60, oftentimes they work 2 jobs.
Yeah.
They're very busy. They hadn't heard about critical race theory until 5 months ago. They are common sense people that are constantly trying to get home in time to take their daughter to volleyball practice, or to lead the volleyball practice because they're the coach,
right?
Or to lead the swim practice, or the after school, or the Cub Scout troop. We're a country of volunteers, and we try to reach those people for whom politics is. They don't watch. Guess what? They're not on Twitter,
right?
And they're not watching cable news. But if you talk to them, and I tell you what, Amazon censoring my ads, which now they have reversed. They censored the ads on my book on Black Lives Matter. And one of the things that occurred to me was that leads to polarization. Conservatives are going to find their way to my book. I do 5 interviews per day, conservative radio. Conservatives are buying my book a great deal. But if I don't talk to the people in the middle, let alone center left, then I'm missing out. Society ends up being more polarized.
Right.
And the actions of big tech lead to this polarization.
Right.
Amen. Mike, you've been so gracious with your time. I got 2 closing ones for you here. The first one is especially for the church, to David's standpoint of being gracious to the folks that maybe are in that 60% or might be leaning one way or the other, or maybe leaning towards CRT and BLM. One of the things I hear a lot in the church around communism and Marxism is a real openness to it, especially because they'll look at the early church and they'll see the early church shared all things, and Christ gave a very specific command of caring for the poor. James talks about true religion is caring for the orphan, the widow, and stranger in their oppression, and that mindset. A lot of Christians, a lot of believers today will see that, and they'll be drawn to communism because they see a system that is built to help, that is promoted as a way of helping those people in the oppression. What would you say to them? And how would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, Christ didn't say more Rome. Let's have more Rome. No, Christ was talking to the individuals and saying, practice charity with your clothes, practice charity with your money. Be fair to your workers, you individually. He wasn't asking the synagogue or the Roman Empire to take over. He was doing the opposite. He was speaking to individuals and saying salvation will come through your individual acts. And in fact, he was very clear about separating that which was Caesar's and that which belongs to my Father.
That's right. And
I think that this is the beginning of an individualistic based approach, in that I'm in charge of my own salvation. It's my relationship between me and the big G, and it's not the state that's going to lead me to salvation at all, nor is the state that's really going to satisfy my need to be charitable to the poor and to the vulnerable. It is incumbent upon me. So I would see Christ, and I see Christ as the great speaker to the individual soul. Yeah. Nothing, the opposite of collectivism. The opposite. He didn't talk like CRT does or communists do to the collective. He spoke to our conscience and to our soul.
Yeah. Mike, last question for you. And this one was, I got this past weekend was special, going online and watching some of the tributes around 9/11.
Yeah.
And obviously hard to go back and relive all of that, but it'd been a while, especially with just the rough political season it's been. And honestly, we haven't even had, those good 4th of July fireworks since I got those good tingly American feelings, you know what I mean? Of why it's great to be an American, why it's a blessing to be an American. And, I think, again, and this is another conversation that we had with pastors and with young people in particular of, all of the goals that BLM and CRT and Marxism are saying they're trying to accomplish, helping people, helping the poor, helping the impoverished, helping the oppressed. Why do you believe, and maybe I should say, do you believe, but I think you do based off of some of the other things you've said, why do you believe that America and the American experiment and the American ideal is actually the best way of helping advance those issues as opposed to the communist ideal?
Because we allow the individual to thrive. We allow the individual to flourish. And our Constitution is the only Constitution that is set up to limit government and to say to the government, these are the areas you shall not trespass. And people have natural rights. It's also based on natural rights, the only Constitution based on natural rights. When I first arrived in this country, almost 50 years ago, almost a half century ago now, I used to ask, why do these Americans care so much about freedom? They've never lost it. Freedom was described to me once by a Chinese dissident as being equal to oxygen. It really doesn't matter to you. You take it for granted until somebody chokes you. Then it becomes the most important thing in your life. And yet Americans are just obsessed with liberty. Why is that? Because the founders left a very good functioning system, not just in the balance of powers, but also in the way that they based everything on natural rights. We have a right to liberty. We have a right to speech. We have a right to free assembly. We have the rights that are God-given or based, if you're not a believer, which is okay. I mean, they're based in nature. I'm a believer. I believe that they're God-given, a gift when we're born. But America is the only country that bases itself on this. No other country does. Even our closest allies, Britain, France, Spain, Germany, Japan, Australia, they don't have a core belief in natural rights. I think it emanates from that. Obviously, the colonial experience, setting out to conquer the West, setting out to with the Bible, as they say, with the Bible in one hand and a rifle in the other. I think that actually it was a very literate group of people, the colonists. But I think that combination, the early colonial experience and the founders' belief in locking natural rights, that I think has made Americans the way we are today.
Well, Mike Gonzalez, Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for joining us again. He is the author of BLM, The Making of a New Marxist Revolution. You can go buy that on Amazon right now, as long as they haven't canceled him again yet. Hopefully, he'll keep going up the charts. But thanks for listening to episode 2 of this volume on Marxism. Again, if you are enjoying these episodes, want to encourage you to rate the pod, give us 5 stars, leave a comment, share the podcast with your friends. This is Aaron Baer with Center for Christian Virtue with my co-host David Mahan, and we'll catch you next time.